Right, so we've got our design transferred onto our fabric, and the next thing that we need to do is we need to actually add the coloured arch in, so that some of our stitches actually come into this area and then are hidden when we do the padding. So I'm going to show you how to do the tacking and how to apply the how to do the couching and how to apply the twists onto the fabric. So the first one that we're going to start with is the red one, okay, and then we need to get our red matching thread. Okay, you can use these threads. These are very similar in colour to the actual thread that we're couching over. These are just stranded cottons and these are the DMC ones, but you could also use the translucent threads if you want, and then you wouldn't be able to see the stitches at all. So I'm going to use the same needle as I used for tacking, so just take my white thread out of there and take my red thread and then thread it up. Okay, and then again I'm going to just knot the end just there. Okay, so for this technique we're going to start with a loop. So I'm going to check how long I actually need it to be. So I need it to be the right length here. I'm just going to measure that out approximately, and then I'm just going to fold that up there. Okay, so we're just going to place our loop just there on the surface of our fabric, and I tend to hold it down with my thumb. Okay, so I'm going to come up and it's just in line with this area here, can you see? So I'm then going to just go over the loop that I've just put on there once, and then I'm going to go over it twice, and this secures it into place. Okay, so the technique that we're using here is called couching, and this is a very old and traditional technique. So all the couching stitches need to be 3 to 4 millimeters apart. That's the ideal distance. And so I'm just coming up on the side of the red thread, and I'm actually going to go over the two, and I'm going to go the distance, the width of the stitch is actually the width of the two pieces of thread when they lie flat together. And you've got to try and get your threads, your stitches parallel as well. So I'm just going to hold that nice and tight. I'm just going to squish that together like that as well, and it just makes it nice and tight together. And then we're just going to carry on up. Now what I tend to do with the design is obviously we've got our tack design on there. We want to try and, with the first row, make sure that the tack design is central. So can you see that it's central there? And we need to try and make sure that our stitches are approximately all the same width and all the same distance apart, and we need to make sure that they're all parallel to each other. So whichever way your thread is going, if your thread is parallel, your stitches will be vertical and vice versa. So they're in the opposite direction to what your thread is going, so a perfect right angle. So you can actually hold your thread along. You need to make sure that these threads are laid flat and are actually separate and they don't overlap. You don't want them to overlap, you want them all to lie flat. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to speed this up, because obviously it's not going to take me a minute or two to get to the end there. It is going to take some time, so it's best if I speed the camera up, and then obviously you can actually get the full effect of the stitching, but not at the speed that I'm actually doing it at. So I've just couched right to the end, just left it a little bit away from the very end, which is where the tacking stitches actually go. So what we now need to do is we need to plunge those ends, trim them off, plunge the ends, and then we can just stitch it up to the end and then over sew at the back. So I'm just going to look where my threads need to go, and they need to be just after that very end there. So when you look at the instructions, and on this page here, it's this area that we're looking at just here, okay? And then this is the gradual effect, which is this gradual effect, which is from this bit right up to here. So this is what we're aiming at. So I'm going to take my scissors and I'm just going to trim that off there because we don't need any more of that, okay? And then I'm just going to, got pins magnetised, I'm just going to pop my needle just down there, so into the fabric, and then I'm going to take my thread through the needle. So this is a big-eyed needle so that it makes it much easier for you to thread your twist through. So this is the 3-ply twist. So I'm now just going to pull that down through the fabric, okay? And then what we're going to do is we're going to just stagger the other one, so a little bit higher, okay? I'm just going to take the end of that through, and again, just pull it. Just make sure that you've got them the right way round and that they're not, again, twisted. As I discussed, it's very important to not allow them to be twisted. Okay, so now you're just going to finish off that end like so. Okay, so sometimes I will actually finish off the ends at the same time, and other times I will actually do a couple of rows before I finish off the very end. So that's what I'm going to do this time. I'm going to actually just start a new thread and start back over here. So we've got our twist, our 3-ply twist here. Just get a few of those bits out. And now, because we're actually doing 3 rows of the red, which you can see when you look at the instructions just here. So you've got your 3 rows, 1, 2 and 3 on there. I'll be able to see it better if I show you the actual design there. So you've got 3 rows of each of the colours, which creates those different blocks of colour. Okay, right, so I'm just going to take the thread, I'm going to halve it, and then I'm going to just cut it. Okay, so you've got 2 more pieces which create your 2 extra rows. Now this is the one which will use the most thread. And again, you want to take the 2 ends of thread together, and then you want to take it to the end like this, and then get the loop. Okay, you want to give that a little bit of a tweak. Okay, so that's your end. Okay, so you want to take another piece of thread. Okay, and then you want to take your needle. And thread it up. Okay, so again, I'm going to just start my needle just slightly further down this time. Okay, and a little bit of distance away from that first row. So then I'm going to place that on, and I'm going to just go over the loop. And then pull that loop down to the fabric. And again, I'm going to do that twice, and that will then secure it nicely into place. And then you want to come up just, so what we're doing is we're doing brick stitch. So it's demonstrated in the instructions. So it is, you know, you can clearly see everything that I'm doing here, but it is good to have the instructions as well. And this is the brick stitch that it shows you there. So that's really useful. So I'm just going to come up the width of those 2 stitches when they're placed together. And then I'm going to hold that thread just like that. And then I'm going to come over and butt it up against that last row. Now I'm actually going in at a slight angle, and what that does is it actually tightens this row up to the first row, and that first row is now our guide row, so it's really important that that follows the curve very well. So I'm going to pull that in, and then you can see how tight that then becomes. And what I'm also doing is I'm actually holding the thread at the right angle. So here I'm holding this thread with my hand, and I'm pulling it tight, and then as I go round I will change the angle of it. So I'm just going to come up there like that, and then back down. Now I'm doing my stitches in between each one of those first stitches on that first row. So I'm coming up very closely, and you can see your distance if you hold your thread at the right angle. And then again, I'm going right under that first row, and that nicely pulls my second row in tightly. If you go too far away with your stitches here, you will end up getting big gaps between your threads, and obviously we don't want that. We want it to be nice and tight. So you just carry on doing your stitches now, and obviously these ones here, these are going slightly into the cloud, and they'll be covered up by the felt and the leather, so you won't be able to see any of those edges, and that's why it doesn't matter that you start with your loop. It's much quicker to start with a loop than it is to start with the plunging, because obviously you need to finish off your ends if you start with the plunging thread. So what I'm going to do is I'm just now going to carry on around that arch of the rainbow, and we're going to speed this up for you so that you can see it nice and quickly. So I'm going to carry on doing this right round the arch. Right, so we've got to the end of the couching nearly, and again I've just stopped before I've got to the end because it's much easier to plunge your ends if you're not quite at the very end. So again, with these ones, because I trimmed it and I knew that 2 meters, which is what the full length was, and then cutting that what was left in half would leave us a reasonable end, I don't need to chop those ends now. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to plunge these individually. I'm going to plunge them a little bit higher, and I'm going to plunge these two together, because if you look at the picture you can see that some are plunged together and some are plunged staggered. So these ones I'm just going to plunge together. Okay, so that takes it down just nicely there. Sometimes you do have to give that little bit a tweak just to make sure that it just flows back in, and then obviously you can just carry on doing your stitching and finish that little area off. And again, you will need to oversew at the back. So I'm going to leave all those threads loose at the back. There's two different ideas about oversewing at the back. You can either do it as you go along, or you can do it all at once. Generally I would do it as I go along, because it's a bit of a laborious task, and I prefer to do bits. But obviously, because we've got it on one of these frames, it's much easier for me to show you at the end. So what you need to do now is you need to sew all of the other lines on here, and you need to make sure that you're getting the curve and you're getting it very close, because what happens is when you're coming inside a curve, there is a tendency for it to gap. So you just need to make sure that all those rows are really nice and tight. So put all the rest of your rows in. So it's red, and then it's the light gold, which is, orange. It's then the light gold, then we've got green, blue, purple and the pink. Okay, not in your typical rainbow order. So those are the colours. There's 3 rows of each one. So if you do all of those and then leave all the ends loose here, I will then in the next video show you how to plunge them all in a staggered way, and then I'll show you how to oversew them on the back. So thank you for watching.